Hi everybody, welcome back to HPC Tech Shorts, the engineering water cooler here in AWS. Brian Loyal is our global expert on protein folding and a senior solution architect in our healthcare AI/ML team. Now, Brian's been doing a lot of work to publish an open source solution for launching AlphaFold in the cloud using AWS Batch and, of course, a bunch of beefy EC2 instances. Now, more recently, he's been working with the OpenFold team from Columbia University in New York to understand how to run that code equally well on AWS, and along the way came up with some ingenious methods for comparing both the accuracy and the performance of these two codes. Now, when I asked him along to tell us about this most recent work, I realized how much I just don't know about proteins and folding. So I asked him to begin with a gentle introduction to the topic for me. Part one today is that gentle introduction. If you're already well versed in this area, skip that episode and go straight to the next one. Every time I look, there's something happening in the protein folding world. And you published a blog post just last week.
Yeah, that's right.
This exact topic, right?
Yeah.
There is a lot going on, right?
Yeah, I got to say, this is one of those spaces where, if you've been following some of the scientific work over the last few decades, things have gotten really fast very recently. This is a really accelerating field. A lot of really cool stuff going on. Yeah, I mean, and what it means is just, faster, dramatically faster time to get the drugs and new therapies. I mean, there's that fairly well-known story about like when Moderna came out with their COVID vaccine back in 2020. A big part of the reason they are able to get that out so fast is because they understand proteins and the protein structures and how they interacted with the body. So the hope is that by using artificial intelligence to solve some of these problems, we can dramatically increase the rate in which these sort of drugs and therapies are produced.
So you're going to have to give me a primer because there's probably a few people like me who are not protein junkies, apart from, when I go to the gym. Help us out here.
Yeah. So, when we talk about proteins, that means a lot of things to different people. I think at some level for all of us in the real world, that is the food we eat, right? We eat protein. It makes our bodies strong. I have a 2-year-old at home. So I always say like, hey, eat your protein. It'll make you grow big and strong. It has a very specific biochemical definition. That's what we're seeing here. It's a chain of amino acids connected by protein bonds. But I think that if you talk about like, what does it actually mean? What's the impact? This is where that science comes in around drug targets and therapeutics and structural biology. What we're seeing here, these are actually 3 examples of proteins that have a pretty big impact on our lives and our health. So the first one on the left is a protein called beta-tubulin. This is a protein which is used when our cells reproduce. And so this is one example of a drug target. This is actually a target for a pretty common cancer drug called Taxol. This is actually the best-selling naturally derived cancer therapeutic in the world. It's derived from the tree in California called the California yew tree. And so understanding the structure was a great way to really develop this therapeutic and make sure it was successful. A couple other examples. So the one in the middle there, this is one that's pretty close to my heart. This comes from plant science. So this is a diagram of a protein called EPSP synthase. This is a protein which is used to help plants grow. It's involved in the structure of the cellular wall. And this is the target of a fairly well-known chemical, which is called glyphosate, probably better known as Roundup in the broader community. So if you ever talk about like, hey, how does Roundup work? It actually impacts this protein. And this is the one that was, when we talk about GMO crops or, plants that were genetically engineered to resist Roundup, this is the protein that was addressed.
Wow.
Yeah, and the one on the left or the far right should be one that I think is familiar to all of us. Maybe not this picture. Yeah, maybe not. But this is the spike protein for COVID. So if you talk about how these new vaccines work, why they're so effective, it comes from understanding this structure. This is the protein that the virus uses to interact with our cells. So a lot of really cool examples here. This is not just an abstract scientific concept. Proteins have a major impact in human health and nutrition and all sorts of other domains as well. So when you talk about like drug development and therapeutics, 4 of the top 5 best-selling therapeutics last year were proteins or involved proteins. And that includes the COVID vaccines, but also some therapeutics involved in cancer as well. So whether you're sort of a layperson and you're just going about your business and you don't really care about the science or this kind of smaller world, or if you are a researcher or a scientist or a physician, proteins have a big role to play in really in all of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. None of us are going to forget the last 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. So proteins are really important. They're important to everything that we do, but there's been some challenges in how researchers understand them. We've seen that the structure is really important, but it's a lot harder to understand a protein structure than just its sequence. So the chain of amino acids in there. And you can see this in the data, in the number of, or the amount of public data which researchers have available to them. You can see on the left-hand side, this is a chart that shows the number of protein sequences that have been available in a public repository over the last couple of decades. And it's spiked up to just over 200 million. We usually get this from doing things like DNA sequencing. We can derive this a variety of ways, but we know a lot of protein sequences. But the protein structures, that's on the right, we know about 1,000 fewer of these. So only about 0.1% of the known proteins in the world do we have a confident structure for, or at least an experimentally derived structure.
And this is just simply because, it's one thing to know the sequence of amino acids that make up the protein. It's quite another thing to understand how that massive molecule structures itself. And then, protein folding is what we're talking about, how it interacts and how it changes its shape when it interacts with things like water or bits of the body or other molecules, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And that's where the complexity explodes.
Yeah, so it's been really expensive. It's really time consuming to get that structure in a laboratory. So the dream has always been, if you can build a model, some kind of computational process to go from A to B, to go from that linear sequence of amino acids to a fully fleshed structure, that would dramatically increase all sorts of different scientific processes.
Right.
And we got there a couple years ago. So AlphaFold. Everyone's heard of AlphaFold. It's kind of this big breakthrough. It was named the scientific breakthrough of the year back in 2021 by Science Magazine. This was developed by a team at DeepMind, and they did a really, really good job of training a machine learning model on all of this experimentally derived data to predict structures from sequences. And it has been used all over the place. A lot of really cool examples of how folks have used AlphaFold. This is actually my favorite. So what you're seeing on the screen here, this is a representation of what's called the nuclear pore complex. So it's essentially like the port that lets material come in and out of the nucleus of your cells. If you remember back to like high school biology, your cells have a nucleus. That's where the DNA lives. And it needs to send messages back and forth to do cell stuff. And this is how it gets back and forth. This is the airlock to the nucleus. This is a huge protein. It's more than 100 nanometers across. You can almost see it under a microscope. It's that big. So what you see in this animation is that it will expand and contract based on a variety of signals. It's an airlock to different parts of your cells. And what this is actually 30 different proteins that are all complex together in interlocking like a puzzle piece. And this protein is so large how for years and years you couldn't analyze this in a laboratory. The methods just didn't work. So instead, what researchers did was they used AlphaFold, the predictions from AlphaFold, for each of these individual chunks, and then algorithmically kind of put them together like a puzzle to build this large structure. This was not a possibility 5 years ago. This is a really cool application of this AI algorithm.
To do that amount of molecular dynamics in silicon prior to AlphaFold would have taken a lifetime worth of.
Absolutely, yeah. This is multiple lifetimes to get this kind of work done.
Simply impossible.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So this has made this whole field tractable.
Oh, yeah. In addition to just structures like this, AlphaFold has been used to fill that gap between the number of sequences we know and the number of structures. So back in July, the DeepMind team announced that they were going to take 200 million of those sequences that we didn't have a structure for in our public databases, run them through AlphaFold, and then release them to the public. And so there are now over 200 million protein structures that were processed through AlphaFold that are available for researchers to use. This is a dramatic expansion of the amount of knowledge we have about protein structures. So big applications using this algorithm.
And so, of course, I can see the setup here with OpenFold. You've now got the chance to actually, So you can now actually just compare how OpenFold does against AlphaFold with the same set of inputs and outputs. So that was our biology refresher, and thanks for sticking with us. Now, if you want to keep going, the next episode right after this, we're going to be talking about the solution that Brian built, some of the details of the comparison that he did between AlphaFold and OpenFold, and then the outcomes of all of that comparison, from a point of view of both accuracy as well as price performance. It's a really interesting discussion. Brian gets into some of the details about how this thing works. And of course, he's going to show you how to get up and running in like half an hour using the open source solution that he built. Hope you keep watching. Now, if these episodes and these shows are helping you understand how to use AWS and how it might be able to help you with your HPC work, please consider subscribing to the channel and give us a like so that it'll help us understand what's helping you so that we can keep making more great content like that.